Welcome to the Craig and Greg Show, presented by Maximize Leadership. Now, here are Craig Owens and Greg Harris.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Craig and Greg Show. I'm Craig, this is Greg, and I am really excited. Been waiting for this episode that we can talk about, ta-da, the brand new book from Greg Harris that's called Sage Advice. Not Sage the Spice, but
it can be spicy.
Sage Advice. And this book has been a long time in the making because some of the stories go way back. How old are you? Way back.
Wow.
But
maybe a decade ago.
But let's fast forward a little bit to more modern times. What got you started at the beginning where you said, I'm going to write this thing down?
You did.
Okay. So, is that my fault or are you?
Depends on the book.
Okay.
It depends what they say.
It's a good book.
It's a good thing. Yeah. We were having bagels. You were talking about writing books, and we're talking about putting some content out there, and you just asked the question. So, like growing up, was there like a rule of thumb, or was there like a family, statement? And then I shared that about my grandma, and then you're like, okay, that's a good start. What else? And that's the irony when you start brainstorming, or we like to call it heart storming.
Yes.
It's like, that was quite easy. I mean, to put that together, you had that with yours. You're like, that's chapter, I'm at 5 chapters already.
Yeah.
And that's kind of fun when it rolls well, because you get like, okay, this is a good project. But I think the reason I got involved was the story that I gave you with my grandma.
Yeah. Well, this is the subtitle of the book is Listen to Wisdom or Learn the Hard Way. And so what Greg has done is just gone back to stories with his parents and grandparents on both sides. And there's been some experiences, some positive, some not so positive, but some kind of catchphrases that came out of some of those things. I love those, like for you and I that have known each other for so long, you can just say the one word. You don't have to say the whole joke anymore, and you don't even have to say the punchline, just the one word. And I go, I know exactly where you're going with that. And it's the same thing in your family, that these phrases, these little catchphrases have kind of rolled around. And so every chapter, share with the folks how you took that story, but it wasn't just telling a story. You used that as a launching point, and then there was some leadership lessons that came from that.
I think people have asked, like, what's the category of the book? So that's been hard for me to define.
That would be a hard one, yeah.
I know. So I don't know if there's a genre or category, but I think life and leadership. So I tie in things that I was either shown or told, modeled by my parents or grandparents, and then maybe something that worked well, like, hey, I listened, and then more of the chapters are, hey, you didn't listen.
Right.
And so there were consequences or embarrassment, or it didn't go the way I wanted, and so those are those life lessons. And then you tie in some leadership, and so each chapter I dedicated. At the very end, I interviewed leaders that I looked up to that could contribute to maybe the theme of that chapter. And they really kind of extrapolated their own stories. So it's not just my story with my parents or grandparents on life or leadership.
Right.
They added to it. So now we have 2 layers. What I didn't do when I was little, maybe, and then what they're doing now that kind of ties it together.
Right. And what I like too is when I was reading like your manuscript as I was going through this, I pointed out to you a couple of times. I said, it's like I'll be reading this story, and I see a picture of your mom and dad, and we go through this story, and then just real seamlessly, you just kind of like segue into Psychology Today pointed out this leader, wrote in his book, and then all of a sudden I found myself like into the leadership lesson, and it was almost like, well, when did the personal story stop and the leadership lesson start? They just naturally just so seamlessly run one thing right into the other. Was that by design when you did that, or was that kind of like, oh, this is a good story, all right, now what leadership lesson can I go and find? Or how did in your mind, did it just flow really easily, or did you have to go kind of hunt these things down?
I think it flowed, I don't want to use the word easily, but I think it flowed because a quote from my grandpa or what my mom stood for in terms of modeled you do play it out later on. You're like, he could have heeded the advice of my grandpa. I know that, because it wouldn't have turned out this way. So you get a lot of feedback or reinforcement of, that's a really good quote from my grandpa or my mom or whatever it is. I think the tie-in to leadership, maybe, quite honestly, maybe I got sick of writing about myself, because the story is the story, right? And it's kind of to set the person up, and then you give them the clinker. And so whether it's a leadership lesson or at the end of each chapter was a leadership interview, and they got to tell their story, show their muscle in leadership, I think it just flowed because after a while, I would talk about my grandpa, who was a business owner, and then you talk about business owners and then leadership in business, and then, a pitfall in business. And so it just was easy just to move from what my grandpa presented to maybe what a reader could use today.
Sure, sure. And I like, as well as we go through this book, you've included a lot of pictures from your family, and it really it helped personalize it. So I just opened here to chapter 16. So you're talking about your grandpa. And the reason why I like this one especially is because your grandpa Vanderweide called the plumber man, and that always reminds me the plunger man. So that's why I and plus this is chapter 16. You got some kind of weird guy at the end that you did.
The leadership interview?
Yeah, the interview at the end.
I ran out of options.
Yeah, apparently.
I really just asked anybody.
Yeah. But I liked seeing that. Like, okay, now I see the face of the guy that you're talking about, and it feels like I'm almost having a conversation with him, even though I didn't meet him. You're telling his story, and I'm seeing his picture, and I'm going, okay, this is a real person that went through it's not like you were just sitting around making up a fable. This really happened, and there's the picture of the guy that it happened to.
When we talked about the time that it took to not just put it together, write it, set it up, put it in sequence, what chapters went with what leader went with what, advice. After a while, you're like, all right, so pictures. I'm like, I went through some old albums, and you helped kind of coordinate some of those too. And the pixel clarity is so difficult.
Right.
Back then, I think they just took the whole reel, brought it to a camera shop, and then they printed it in some dark room, and you got it back in a week or two. I mean, now you can go online and they'll ship it to you in 3 days. It's way different. But we couldn't really tweak those, but I think that kind of brings the legitimacy.
Absolutely.
Like, that's my grandpa in a plumber's outfit with his lunchbox on a sidewalk coming home from a hard day's work.
Yep.
Do I really want that to look like today? No, he would be 100 and some years old. They didn't have those cameras. So I almost envisioned, I don't know what those are called, where the photographer is underneath the black.
Oh, yeah. Ready?
And then just
the big explosion of light. Yeah.
No, that'd be a great lesson. But I think the honor of the people in there, I mean, there's some good ones like, don't get caught. My dad has a fish. And they tie in really well. But it does bring it home.
Sure.
I mean, they're real people, and my sister's in it, and my cousin's in it, and my aunts are in it, and just places that my family operated and lived or vacationed or whatever it was. So it was very cathartic for me to write it. But I think of all the audience, other than you being a part of the project with me, my mom and dad were just chomping at the bit to get it, and it was adorable. So
I'm sure it becomes a legacy that you can hand down. Your kids can say, hey, look, here's the story of my great grandparents, and which is kind of cool. Yeah. Now, speaking of that, though, what about somebody who, in this book, like I said on the subtitle, you're really saying, let's look to some of the leaders that came before us and learn lessons. Sometimes the lessons weren't even really so much what you learned firsthand, but just secondhand as you were watching, their life. But what would you say to somebody that maybe they don't have parents and grandparents that are involved the way that yours were? Where are they going to go to look for these kind of sage advice, this learning experience?
We've thought about that, you and I. It's like, so some didn't have great advisors, whether that's a parent or grandparent, could be an aunt, uncle, could be a coach, teacher, youth pastor, whatever. Some didn't have a lot of those. And I think that's probably maybe giving them some credit.
Sure.
Like when I wrote this, I'm like, wow, a lot of people invested in me.
Yep.
Some of which I hope the ROI was good, right? But some didn't have a lot of investment in them. Some had to do it themselves. I'm not speaking of particular categories, but like a latchkey kid would be a perfect example of no one's home when they come back from school, and they got the key, they go in the house, latchkey. Well, who's there to advise them, ask them how their day went, challenge them to get their work done before nightfall? So there are people in those situations. I guess I would encourage them. The book is just to prompt it. And I don't know if a person never had investment, but they might have had more deficit,
Sure.
From leaders and elders in their life versus investment. But I think finding those investors, whether that's someone at work, maybe someone from church, someone in your neighborhood, could be another relative that knows you well enough to, maybe connect the dots, put the pieces together if parents or grandparents aren't around or available to do it. So
right.
I think stay encouraged really is my point. Like there's such great wisdom in historical leaders and elders.
Yep.
I just wanted to pen it myself, and probably as much, not therapy, but probably confirmation for me. Wow. I had a lot of investors. Wow.
Well, and don't you think that despite maybe what some people believe incorrectly, don't you think that there's a lot of people out there that would be willing to invest in somebody's life if they were just asked?
The invitation is just very short. There's not a lot going on. Like, hey, I'd like you to invest in my life. You'd be like, really? I mean, most people would be like, I'm honored. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't take much. You don't have to, put a billboard out and try to recruit people. You just maybe find someone who God could prompt it. Door comes open. I'm going to talk to this person. I like him at church. He's really helpful. Or I met him at school when I dropped my kids off. Maybe, he'd help me.
Sure.
So and I think as we've talked about for Maximize Leadership and coaching, it's ongoing, even at whatever age.
Right.
So that's really where sound advice comes through, or sage advice is sound advice from a coach, sage advice from my parents and grandparents. It's just, if it's out there.
Yeah.
And potentially one of our biggest things is pride. We just don't want to be told what to do. Well,
or admit that we need somebody to tell us something.
I mean, one of my funniest ones, well, I don't know. You'll have to read it and tell me. But one of the funny ones that often people talk about is my grandpa. We're driving around in his red construction pickup truck, and he's got Tums. He's popping Tums. There's no cell phone, obviously, so it's all a little chicken scratch on pieces of paper. And he stops off at a job or stops off at a supply shop, and then we get in the truck, and he goes, "Hey, by the way, don't put lipstick on a pig." And he's driving down the road, and I'm like, "Grandpa, we don't own any pigs." I'm 6, 7, 8 years old, He goes, "That's not what I'm talking about." And there became the lesson, right? The statement said something, but I didn't really have a clue what pigs. We don't have pigs. We're not farmers. And his was, don't put good money after a bad investment. Don't continue on a project if you can't get it done. Right. Don't hang around someone who's bringing you down a bad road. And so it's that, don't put lipstick on something. Yep. And I just didn't have a clue. I had the little boy, but I'm not a little boy anymore. And you're like, makes a lot of sense today. And we've had those situations where like, why didn't I put lipstick there? That's so dumb. It's just not going to work.
Right. Well, no, and I think, I don't remember if it's the last chapter or it's 20 chapters in the book. So it's either chapter 19 or 20. Oh, I just opened chapter 20. I think that this goes really well with if you're looking for somebody, like I got to pick somebody to maybe mentor me or speak to me. But chapter 20 is trust a person with a limp. Where does that come from, and how would that tie into somebody that's looking for, I need somebody to invest in my life?
I think both my parents and both sets of grandparents trusted people. And when they came, to church, or they came to the community event, or they saw them at the barber shop or the grocery store, they knew someone who was legit. They were transparent, real, they weren't fake, they weren't posing. And I think that 20th chapter, the limp is really you're not looking to follow someone perfect. You're looking to be around someone who can give you sage advice, and it might be from their expensive experiences.
That's why they're limping. Yes.
So I think it gives validation to you don't want the best story.
Right.
You want the best advice.
Yes.
So I think that one probably wraps it up nice in terms of the book is, find someone with a limp, find someone with a story, find someone that you can connect to.
Yep. Yep. Well, listen, this, a lot of books, you got to read chapter 1 in order to get to chapter 2 or so on and so forth. This is really 20 standalone stories.
Yeah.
You don't have to read like chapters 1 through 14 for 15 to make sense. And so that's why I encourage you to pick this book up. You could leave it on a nightstand and just read one chapter, one story a night, and it would be memorable for you. If you go to maximizeleadership.com, there's a link on there to get sage advice. And again, I haven't asked Greg, but I'm just going to volunteer him. If you say that you're purchasing the book because you heard about it here on the Craig and Greg Show, you'll autograph it for him, won't you?
I will autograph. I have a question for you.
Yes.
Though. Of the 20 chapters, which one resonated with you more than others?
The trust, the person with the limp.
Okay.
Definitely, because that has been. Like you said, there's nobody perfect, there's people in history that I really trust them, and I go back and then you start reading their biography and you're going, whoa, man, they kind of stumbled in a few spots. They had a limp, but they were real. They overcame that, and that's the one that really.
I think maybe one message about the book is what chapter hits you, and what's been fascinating with the dozens of people that have bought the book already, just came out. Each person has a different chapter that resonates.
Yeah.
That's what I find so fascinating versus like, I like the character of that fiction book, or,
right.
That was really suspenseful. I didn't know that outcome was going to happen. This is pretty much like you said, and I don't know if this is good advice for, you folks in leadership, but I throw a book in my car all the time.
Oh, sure.
I mean, it's just never know. If you got a long commute, you're in a big city, you get in a traffic jam, you're like, all right, so I'm going to be late. So you might have time, whether you pull off or you're waiting for your appointment and you're early, to put that book together. Like I'm not even sure. Like you're talking within 4 or 5 pages.
Right. Per chapter.
It's just so easy to get into it. And I like that statement. So my challenge as you read one chapter, kind of work on that, ruminate on that one piece of advice.
Yep.
And then look at in my life, I think I did okay with that. I kind of fumbled,
right.
And it's okay. And it's not all perfect. I can tell you that I didn't heed all the advice, and sometimes that caused me. Do you have a story in there, not the title of a chapter, but one story you're like, I've heard it 10 times, Greg, but it'd really pee in your pants funny. What is it?
Oh, let's see here. I think, I don't want to give away there's one about a girl at the beach. I don't know if you want to give away the title on that one, because that one, just the statement alone, the girl in the red bikini wants to be noticed.
Yep. So it was advice from my grandpa. So it was, a guy to his grandson. I would say it, whatever I was, 7 years old. I mean, I wouldn't say it was a pretty lady. It was just a lady who came to the, beach in a red bikini. It didn't really resonate with me. My grandpa thought, you know what? In about 10 years, you'll see the red bikini. You'll recognize it. Right now, you're talking baseball cards. And so he just happened to say, yeah, just be careful of the person in the red bikini. They're really about attention. And back then I'm like, okay, well, let's go play catch, Grandpa. But now I realize, so to be seen, noticed, look at me, it's really not a person who's an investor. It's really a person who's a taker.
Yes.
And I think, not about bikinis, but that was his point at that beach with that person. Potentially, as a boy, I missed it, but, probably, 5 out of 10 of the guys, they were like, and then if she looked back, they'd all blush, right? Like she just wanted the attention anyway. So, yeah, the clinkers are good. Sometimes it's observation, and sometimes many of the chapters were just what they stood for.
Sure.
And I had to kind of take a step back and take a little inventory. Wow, my parents and grandparents overall stood for really solid values. And if I stepped out, I would not be, co-joined by them. I'd be like doing something silly or not smart. They just showed so many attributes to follow. And I think that's where your point was 10 minutes ago, is if someone didn't have those people, what do they look for?
Absolutely. Yeah. So what you're going to find in every chapter, like we said, there's a really delightful story, a leadership lesson. There's going to be an interview with a modern day leader. And then if you say, like Greg mentioned a couple of minutes ago, I haven't done so well on this one, or I need to go farther. Greg has got some book suggestions at the end of each chapter, some books that have helped him to go farther with that leadership idea, and they probably would with you as well. So, but here's what you can do as well. If you've got a question, you say, hey, maybe you read the book, or I want to go farther in this one, you could leave a comment below on this video, or you could tweet at us at Maximize Podcast and just say, hey, what would you say about this, or how do I get another resource here? But if you haven't picked up the book yet, once again, Maximize Leadership, there's a page on there or a tab on there for sage advice. You can just give your information in there, and Greg will autograph a copy and send it out to you. It'd be great for you. I know I said this on, I posted a book review on my blog, and I said, my highly unbiased, completely impartial book. It's not impartial. It's a good book. It's a really good book. And so I think you need to pick up a copy and enjoy it yourself. And stay tuned here, because we got more stories to tell you and more leadership lessons to be able to share with you. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the YouTube channel and click the bell so you're notified. We've got full episodes like this. We've got Max Minutes, where Greg just shares in a minute or less a thought to help maximize your leadership. We've got shorter clips that we share. You don't want to miss out on any of that content. We're here to resource you, hopefully give a little sage advice for you to help you in your leadership journey. We'll be back with you real soon.
Get in touch with Craig and Greg through Twitter at Maximize Podcast or at MaximizeLeadership.com. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any episodes of The Craig and Greg Show.